I'm going to introduce the two session leaders for this morning's session, and they will then introduce our presenters. Our two session leaders are Sibyl Wickersheimer. Sibyl is an associate professor of scenic design for the USC School of Dramatic Arts and a practicing set designer for theatrical stages across the country. We also have Lynn Dodd. Lynn is professor of the practice of religion and spatial sciences and the founder and director of the Archaeology Research Center Extended Reality Lab. So, Sibyl and Lynn, over to you to introduce our session presenters.
I'm going to let you do the intro.
Okay, great. Hello. So we have today for the 3D visualization of the John Ezell collection, Harper Tooch, who is a 3D visualization specialist at Washington University in St. Louis. She's also trained as an art historian and archaeologist. And Sarah Swanz is the digital humanities librarian and data curator for deposits into WashU, Washington University research data. So without further ado,
Great.
Thank you for presenting your material.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having us. So our presentation today is about facilitating access to hidden collections. We have about 200 models of set designs from John Ezell, who is a renowned set designer. And what these maquettes are, you'll see an example here that just doesn't do it justice. They're roughly about this size, okay? And usually of like poster board is sort of, at least the frame is. And he'll start, with sketches and drawings and talk to the director and, decide on how they want the play to go. But as he works through his set designs, eventually he'll start building out this 3D model. And this is as close to what the final set will look like. This is, when they sort of agree on this, then the specs get sent out to the workshop for actually constructing the set. And at that point, there'll be tweaks when they actually put it on the stage. But for the most part, this is pretty faithful to the final production. So here is a scene from, and you can kind of see that here a little bit. There's this fountain and an orrery here, and you see the fountain and orrery here as well. And then, this gate is this gate here. And they're just exquisite. The detail is just marvelous in the original here. And the other thing to know about them is it's not just for a specific play, but it's for a specific production of the play on a specific stage. So, of course, what he decides to do and how to lay things out can depend on the dimensions of the stage they're working in. And just to give you a little bit of background on what we have about 200 of these models. John Ezell was born in St. Louis, and so about 5 years ago, I think, we acquired these models from him. He still has more in his studio we hope to get. And our Rob Morgan is a professor of set design at WashU, and he loves the fact that we have them because then he can use them as well. Then this is John Ezell himself. Our project motivations were primarily started out with, because these were in our special collections, our sort of first thought was digital preservation. How can they're very, very fragile objects. They're not easily transported because they're big, and they're not stackable because they're so fragile. But also as a way to provide access. So we wanted to share them to the classroom and have classes come visit to look at them, but even just taking them off the shelf, putting them in a classroom, our sort of off-site storage is, off-site, so transporting them to campus, all that stuff, we wanted a way that classes and students could use it without harming the objects. And then that's sort of how things started, and then just more and more like how can we do more with it to actually teach set design rather than just show off these beautiful models. So let me flip over quickly to show you what we have in Voyager. This is Love, Labor's Lost, which is the one I showed you the still photos of. We've been putting them in the Voyager viewer, and Harper's going to talk about the Voyager viewer more specifically. But I'm just going to give you a little tour for those of you who didn't have access to this to start. So here's our orrery and fountain. He'll even add people to them. You can get a sense of the detail and the detail of the stage too. So you can kind of see like this is very specific stage apron there, the backdrop, and then we're also scanning the box. Partly because we can't separate the box from the model, and we'll get into why that's a problem. But just wanted to explore a bit in here. And then in our demo, you can then walk around the stage yourself and see what it would be like from the actor's perspective. So we've put that in Unity so you can walk around. But at the very least, you get this aspect of things. So let me go back to the slides. No, I'll leave it to Harper.
Yeah, so moving on to the technical design of this project, instead of talking about our workflow of photogrammetry, which most of you have worked with before, I wanted to talk about why we chose photogrammetry specifically for this project. Before even starting this project, we were investigating a lot of different ways to capture these maquettes, such as structured laser scanning. However, we settled on photogrammetry just because we had greater control over how we were taking photos of these maquettes, and also we were able to, more crucially, preserve the parameters that we needed to have others actually create the maquettes if they wanted to themselves as a teaching tool to reproduce what we have been creating for this project. And so the photogrammetry also allows us to, as all sets are different and created, like Sarah said, for different sets. They are all varying sizes, of varying degrees, varying colors. So it allows us to have a base layer of how many photos that we can take of each set and work up from there to capture all of these minute details, the scale, textures, and all of that. Also, it allows us to stop and think about what we want to preserve with these imaging. So as Sarah will talk about later, we really looked at the Community Standards of 3D Preservation. It's a book co-written by our boss and Francesca as well. And we were able to stop and think about these preservation intervention points, which is something that's very important within this workflow process. To stop, ask who the audience is, what do we want to preserve for future generations, and what do we want to retain in this project. So the next step after creating the models was actually sharing the maquettes, and we chose to use Smithsonian's Voyager. One of the reasons we chose to disseminate these models through Voyager specifically was because it is an open source platform, and Smithsonian actually created it as they are a museum to display, engage, and share different models that they have in their collection. And they have great tools within this Voyager Explorer, such as annotations. You can create tours. You can embed other pictures and articles. You also can add audio. So these are different tools that we are looking to add in the future to be able to create a more immersive viewing experience for people to come in. Also, it is interoperable and it is not proprietary, which is something that as a museum, in a library, and with the aim to provide access to others, we want to be able to have others be able to go in, take these models off our website and off our data repository, download them, use them for their own purposes. They can download the models, they can embed the models in their own projects. So really giving the flexibility back to the students and back to accessibility for wider audiences. So as Sarah said, we do have a VR component that we are in the process of developing. It is in its beginner stages, as you will see with the demo. However, we're really looking to create an immersive experience in which users can go and explore the maquettes as if they were real sets. And we are placing them in the Edison Theater and WashU's campus, just as it was the easiest place for us to get a scan and recreate this stage, although as Sarah will talk a little bit later, there are some difficulties as the size of the maquettes don't always fit within our theater and other things like that. But we are looking to try to recreate and mirror a real life theater environment so that users can walk around these full-scale models that aren't necessarily available to them today. So John Ezell was creating these maquettes from the 80s all the way to the early 2000s. And a lot of the full-size scale sets are no longer available and no longer in use. So being able to blow these up full size and walk around them really lets you understand his workflow, his process, and understand what really good set designs from an award-winning set designer look like. We also have added and are continuing to add soundscape as well to these. So we are trying to incorporate sound from play scenes that you can hear as you're looking at the stage, and lighting as well. So it really does enhance the immersive experience for you to hear what it's like being on that and viewing that, but also you can walk up on stage and look as if you were an actor. So the next steps for our project, one of the big things that we want to do is work with students and try to create better annotations. So as you can see in this photo, this is an annotation example from the Smithsonian's website using Charlie Parker's saxophone. And we're looking to create more in-depth annotations using Voyager with classroom participants. So we want to work with different professors on campus and different students to actually take these scenes, these Voyager scenes, and go in, annotate them, create articles, make the viewing experience a lot more richer through what they're learning in class so that we can hold on to them and have others be able to learn more about set design from students and experts. As we are from the libraries, we are not subject experts of this set design process. However, we would like to work with students to really enhance what we already have and the models that we do have in our collection. Another thing is to improve our VR experience. As I said, it is in the beginning processes. We only have digitized around 25 models out of the 200. So we do have a lot of models to go and a lot of different models to put in this Unity project. So this is something that we're looking to enhance. Also user experience enhancement. We want to be able to add more lighting, also add elements that students can play around with lighting with these maquettes, because lighting does change the stage and how it looks to the audience. And so that's really what we're looking to do with our next steps of this project.
So one of the problems we have is just dealing with perspective and scale. So here, I was pointing out earlier with the sort of box format, there's things in the way, right? There's depth to these things. So things in the rear are not getting captured well because we can't capture them from the rear because there's a wall. This back in here is a little, things will be blurry in the back, things like that. There's only so much we can do. And then here, we can at least scan from the top. A lot of them have a top, but this at least has an open top with just the rigging structure. But even here from above, you can see that it's still not, you can see some sort of ugly bits and how it looks in here. So the models are good from the front and the audience view, but how good they are from the actual stage view, like if you're standing at the rear of the stage, you might see a rougher version of the objects on stage than from the audience view. So that's a problem we have with here. And if we talk about scale, there's another sense of scale. It's like we have 200 of these. They're all unique. Like we can't find a workflow to press the button, send to a student and say, do this every time, because they're all different. And so there's that other side of scale that's a problem for us. And then there's the materiality itself. So all of you who have done this before know this is a problem, but this is one where that back portion was actually transparent. So that messed with a lot. And so, I mean, that's a very technical term. And so, there's, again, he's very faithful to the real thing. So he'll find the right fabric for his curtains or the furniture and things like that. So all that stuff plays into the scan itself and how good it's going to be. And again, how much effort can we reasonably put in to do this for all 200 maquettes is sort of another big picture question for us. And in some ways, well, I don't know, I'm kind of curious, how many of you sense the fragility of these? I almost feel like these images don't do it justice to when you see it in person and you sort of see how fragile it is. This is not Lego or Playmobil, this is very fragile stuff. So another big question is just, like I was talking about a little bit, like our workflow and preservation. This was a volume Harper mentioned, 3D data creation to curation, developing community standards for 3D data preservation. Hopefully some of you in this room already know about it and are using it and applying it. I'm also a data curator, so, and in our data services office more generally, we run our data repository. So we take this stuff pretty seriously and trying to think through, like, what is our preservation object here? So when we started the project, our preservation object was the maquette as a whole. But as we start working and putting these models in something like Unity, then it's like, okay, maybe we break it down. And it's, the model becomes, okay, this piece of stage furniture, then there's this piece of stage furniture, and this backdrop and that backdrop. And suddenly what was one object of preservation becomes possibly hundreds. And so thinking through that, like, what is our objective? And so there's this potential tension between this modeling for preservation that we started doing and then modeling for teaching, because in the teaching experience, maybe you do want to break that down. You want to be able to say, see the choices that John Ezell made. He put the cabinet over here, stage left instead of stage right. What does it mean when we move it, right? And you can't have that experience unless you break down the individual pieces of the model. So we have no answers to any of that, but these are the kinds of challenges we're thinking through and sort of what makes sense, because as you know, it's a lot of work. At the basic level, you saw that he sometimes has human figures on his sets. Could we at least remove the human figures, even if we can't move all the individual furniture on the stage, to give more of the actor experience? So if you have the headsets on and you're walking through, you're not, the other humans aren't in the way that are part of the model. So this is, we don't have great answers, but this is the kind of things we're thinking through. That's it.
So this is particularly fascinating for me because, first of all, as a set designer, I actually went to Washington University. So I was there, and I don't know John Ezell's work, but there's a strong connection there. And I think that as a teacher of set design, you have put your finger on two big questions that I talk about in my classroom a lot, which is, who is your audience, and the design decisions that we make from scene to scene and to create what we do on stage, which is ultimately a decision that's a team-based collaborative effort to decide, where are we putting this as a whole in a concept, but then where does the cabinet go and where does the actors go, and it's a flow of scene to scene for every production. So there's a lot of communication around those elements. So I love that you're trying to explore how to break down the models, which also, as a set designer, I'm always wanting to glue things down because I'm knocking them over in the model because they're very small. So 1/4 inch scale is the scale of the model. So 1/4 inch equals 1 foot. Sometimes in opera, they'll do 1/2 inch scale equals 1 foot, which just means that your workspace has to be a lot bigger. So it's incredibly small, and I often am using tweezers to move things around. set up a scene, but it's very hard to do that for a room full of collaborators, to show them the only view that actually makes sense, which is directly in front with the model at the exact right height, to see in it the way you would see it from the audience perspective. So there's actually you've touched on so many things, all within the challenges that you've come across in keeping these. In my office, I have boxes of models that are, there's a box and they're stacked up, and I generally use paper to build almost everything. So they're fragile. They do stay, if you box them, they do, keep for a little while. But what if you had, a flood, or you could easily see how they could go awry. So I'm very curious about those choices and the design decisions that you've had to make, especially lighting design decisions, because the models don't really come alive until you put lighting within them and show three-dimensionality through lighting. So that's a big choice to be had. And then as a teaching tool for not just at WashU, but anywhere, the accessibility is such an amazing opportunity to share that. But the dialogue that you're having around digitizing actually is the similar dialogue that we have in creating. And so how can we, how can we as historians and curators put that together so that that's part of what you're actually, your teaching tool? Does that make sense? So maybe there's something to be had in asking yourself, if we break it down, each model, is there a benefit to the user because now they have to make those choices rather than you making those choices, even though we don't necessarily have to connect it to the original design. So I think that's my question to you, is about the design decisions, and how do you go about
that? We haven't solved it. We're just thinking it through and working it through, we are at that point where there's tension, because I feel like we're fine with scanning the maquette, and the Unity is nice. It sort of was started out as an extra, but now we realize to really make it a great teaching tool, it's can't be an extra anymore.
Right.
And I think that's probably a tension many of this room have felt, is okay, where are we getting the resources and the time to actually take that next step? Because from the sort of special collection standpoint, we've done the digital preservation piece and access piece when we just scan the model, and the putting it all in Unity, which is a whole nother level of effort, and breaking down all the individual parts, that maybe is extra, and maybe that's something go seek grant funding or something like that. This is all just internal project right now. So that's where we stand now. It's how we like the idea too, but it's sort of
right.
okay, realistically, how can we actually do it? And that might be something where we then have to go get grant funding to take it that far.
Yeah, and with the design choices of how we actually capture the models, we are just doing it in-house. I am the only person working on this project to digitize the objects, with student workers, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But Sarah said, that this is going to be a larger project if we're looking to do access with teaching and creating it into a teaching tool, which isn't always and wasn't the start goal of this project. So thinking through those things and how we can actually further this conversation with other people who are interested in Ezell's work, conversation with faculty, with students, with other universities, is something that would require a lot more time that internally we don't always necessarily have.
Yeah.
Perhaps it's unnecessary, and I think there is a lot of movement just in viewing them on the screen, where you can actually get quite close to the object. So maybe it's a teaching tool in a way about how is this realized in terms of an aesthetic choices that are being made, and analyzing the overall rather than allowing students themselves or whoever's looking at the models to actually play with the pieces rather than to analyze the pieces, which is more of an archivist goal, right?
Right.
So,
Yeah, but the thing that would be great to figure out, so our rear view is usually all black because that's the rear. If we could find a way for the rear view of the 3D model without needing to go into a headset, could be, the scrim in the back. And if that at least could be the rear view, that might be a step forward. But I don't know how to do that.
I'm incredibly interested in the methodology in order to use it as a collaborative tool, because design teams are, they're all over the country. So I'm working on projects with a director in, Chicago, costume designer in Seattle, puppeteer in New York, and we're all coming together on Zoom to talk. Next week, for that project, I'm in New York doing a hands-on workshop with those people for 3 days, just to be able to play in real space together. But then we'll disperse until January to put the show up. So it seems like there would be a huge
and that's why
benefit.
the annotation tool was really important to us, because we wanted that. And then you could even collaborate asynchronously, right? People just annotate things. They don't even have to be even together. And if we actually get like John Ezell's design notes, we could sort of add those as annotations, but then also, with the analogy to like the hypothesis tool, for any of you who've used that in the classroom, we'd have permanent annotations that would be, like John Ezell's notes, but then the individual classes could add their own annotations and then, wipe them clean after the class is over, and then new class do their own annotation, that kind of thing. So that, like, long term, is something we'd really like to do. And this collection is what we started exploring Voyager with, but if we're happy with the way Voyager works, we'll start using it more, because that annotation tool part is the part we really like about it.
So I'd like to take up, first of all, the issue of presence, which is so important in theater. And, we're, in some respects, a microcosm of that reality. We have producers who have brought this together, so thank you to them. The audience that is here creating this experience by consuming it and participating as well. And then the actual theater spaces that we're talking about. The theater for me as an archaeologist is really interesting, and it's been great to have this opportunity to think about it, because it's a space replete with identities and power relations. And for me, those are really dependent upon being in the theater somehow. And so I realize there are going to be people who are consuming this experience virtually, distantly, remotely, but you just touched upon the point that you're getting people together, that being there is essential to the theater. And so I was wondering, in your existing capture decisions and in what you're thinking about doing in the future, how is the potential of immersive 3D and its ability to provoke that embodied experience, the presence, for lack of presence, how is that figuring into your thinking and planning and potentials?
That's something that's really important, I think, to all theater, and with adding the soundscape, I think it adds another level of presence, because we did start with just the model on its own and being able to walk around in it, but you're lacking some sort of, it didn't bring you into the immersion as much as if you were actually hearing the performers discussing and performing their scene. And so being able to add that layer of soundscape in these immersive experiences really also, I think, adds another level of presence that was very much lacking when you're looking at Voyager, for example, and also just walking around a set normally. And with these maquettes, when you're seeing them in person, the embodiment is very distant, as you're just looking at a little scale model without any real ability to enter into that space. So that's why this VR project is so important, I think, to kind of giving more access within the maquettes themselves, because it does allow that level of presence to then be imbued back into the object that has been very much removed from the idea of presence.
Yeah, and I just add to that, so Rob Morgan is a professor at WashU in performing arts, and he's done much more in, he's been working with professors at University of York in the UK, and essentially put on a play, actually it was an opera, in VR, live performance. So the opera singer is singing and that providing the voice, and the audience is dispersed and seeing it through VR. So, you know, there's a presence, but it's virtual, but there, it was, all of this stuff for him was, you know, COVID, right? Like, how can we get around COVID and be together separately? And VR was the place to do that for him.
So in thinking as you move forward, because I know that when we were speaking before this session, there's, you know, you're experimenting in Unity now. And so perhaps can you reflect a little bit the differences in your own thinking about this project and its potentials as a creation of digital assets and curation project versus an immersive, embodied experiential project? And what are the sort of intellectual affordances that are in tension with each other, and that you are you know, that you find yourself drawn to support or drawn to address?
I think at first we were hesitant to create a VR experience, just because the lack of access for individuals who are not able to use VR. And that was a question of, do we want these maquettes to, again, be imbued with this presence and be able to actually interact with the space versus having them accessible on the web, where a lot more individuals can actually use it and use the technologies that we have, which are more advanced than what we have for accessibility within the headsets. So that was something that was really important to us as an archival kind of preserving process, so that we do level the playing field, so to speak, for different individuals with different abilities, and being able to really create something that more individuals can interact with, and more individuals can also download for themselves. And there is this lack of, not lack, but you do have to have a very knowledgeable background to use Unity. And so a lot of set designers don't have a coding background. So how can we make this accessible to those students who have a humanities background, who want to venture into technology, but don't necessarily have that platform to be able to go in and create a Unity space or edit a Unity space with scripting? So being able to use Voyager, the interface is very user-friendly, and they're able to add sound. They can add different things that others couldn't do if they didn't have the background in coding. So that's something that we also really tried to think about at the beginning of this process, about how and what was important to retain, and how we could have individuals with varying degrees of knowledge be able to access this in a similar fashion.
Yeah, and I'd add, for me, the biggest difference was just this audience perspective to the actor perspective. I mean, it was huge, really, because when you're just looking at the front view, and then you have the headset on, and you're an actor on stage, and you look at the audience, it was almost that feeling of stage fright, almost. That was different than if I was just looking at the model. Our model stage has no people in the audience. It's just seeing this red velvet seats. So yeah, you get that sort of different sense of it, and the size of it as a human being in that set. So the Edison theaters are campus theaters, not an enormous one, but just sort of, okay, how many steps would it take for me to walk from here to here, and getting that sense of scale. And then one thing we haven't done is, like, if there's more than one person on the stage, how would we work together in VR to act out the scene? So that was definitely different to me. And then there's just more opportunity to add the light and soundscape Voyager so far, you can play a little with lighting, but it's for the whole Voyager scene, so you can't like add a spotlight or whatever you might do on the stage. So yeah, it's very different experience when you're in the headset.
The audience relationship to the performer, which is something that set designers have to intrinsically utilize, sets up a lot. So whether you're viewing from the audience perspective down and looking down at the stage or looking up at the stage, or that relationship impacts the emotional impact of the play or the scene. And so I think it's wise to be able to show that in VR space, and yet the model is a tool. It's not the finished product of the production. And so knowing that you are digitizing the tool, right, that we're using to showcase the design or think through the design concepts, perhaps hearing Ezell talk about the design choices while walking around his set could be another avenue to explore, rather than worrying about capturing the scene from the show.
We need to hook up with the volumetric team. And
yeah, I mean, maybe it's just something I just thought of, and I think that might release you from feeling the need to showcase the actual production, because you don't have the actual production, you have the model. And one of the lovely things was to be able to rotate around the box itself and see the glue that was holding it together, and it makes it feel, that's where the fragility comes in, and the humanness of what he made,
Materiality and its ineffable qualities. Also, like theater, it's there and then it's gone.
Right.
And one of the comments you made was, and this goes to the question of audience, who's using this? Are there people in production class, for example, who might want to see if this prop is over on the right side of the stage as opposed to the left? And I wonder if any of your technical decisions about, for example, photogrammetry capturing as components and chunks, depending on what program you're using, would afford you that easy access to pick up and move and try it from that educational and being in that space of creating the production. Is that something you are thinking about at all? Does that have value for you as an intellectual outcome?
I mean, we like the idea. The question is, again, the sort of how realistic from a staffing and workflow perspective can we do it? Because it would change up our photogrammetry setup. But yeah, anything we would want ideas around how to do it. I mean, what I want is like the sort of dental mirror size camera to like be able to go in the back and get all that texture in from the rear. Has that been invented yet? I feel I just want to.
The fiber optic end camera?
Yeah, sort of like a medical
like an endoscopy camera.
Yeah, and be able to get back there, get some detail.
Should we just open it up?
Yeah.
It's not really a question, more a comment that I think could be of interest. I'm an Egyptologist, and actually in Egypt we found what we call maquettes, that are three-dimensional models of temples, especially, or other buildings as well. And so we have been thinking like, what was the function of this maquette in ancient Egypt, what they were doing with that. And so the theory is an offering to the temple. You offer a model of the temple that was a symbol of the cosmos to the temple, to the real temple. But another hypothesis recently has been that actually they were doing this model before building the temple, so to have a better idea from the outside how that will look. And I think it will be really useful indeed to have this project available also for the users, the viewers in VR or 3D, to better understand indeed what you get. So you see, you were talking about the audience and being present inside, but I think it's also important to be able to look from the outside, the reality in which eventually you will be in, right? So just comment about it.
Francesca.
Thank you for this great discussion and talk and presentation of the materials. I'm really curious about this understanding that the breakdown of these things into components can be extremely difficult and time consuming. And yet there's still those practitioners who work in this way. And so perhaps there's an opportunity to think through a workflow of, preserving, but also working with contemporary practitioners. And those things maybe have not been built yet, so you can scan and bring those things in. I'm thinking of platforms like Tinkercad or 8XR.io that are not as advanced as Unity and don't give you the same kind of level, but are still collaborative in the process of 3D modeling that could allow for students, maybe something like 8XR.io, where they could play with light, right? They could play with moving things around if those components are separate. And thinking about that as a workflow that, with a faculty support, could draw that through line for teaching and learning. Just because I come across this same type of thing when it comes to exhibition practice, right? That it's a contextual process. You need all of the components to play with in order to teach that experience. And so is that something, do you have partners across campus that you've been talking with that are excited about this? It's such an incredible collection, and I don't know how difficult it would be to sort of splice maybe some elements out of a single maquette, like to use one as that
Right,
kind
a
of-
demo idea, yeah.
Yeah, as opposed to all of them. Maybe it's just one that I prototype with in that way.
Yeah, I mean, Rob Morgan's probably our primary user of them, but there's another Professor Elizabeth Hunter who's doing a lot of neat things in performing arts and VR. So yeah, we'd have to think. A lot of Rob's stuff is just using like frame VR, and he used the sort of the little cartoon characters. That's what I think of him as. But he's done neat things in that sense of adding the voice into it. Yeah, no thanks. We'll get back to you.
Elaine has a question.
Yeah, I wonder if you all could talk about the challenges of using Voyager, right? So you're using a platform designed by a different museum that's dealing with its own specific collection goals. So you're taking, you're giving up some kinds of functionality by using a platform designed by another institution for their own purposes. And I'm thinking here of the fact that we're here at USC, which has designed Scalar, right? So I myself used Scalar for my own publication, right? Trying to reuse things that are generalized for other people. But then yesterday we saw SciArc, who designed their own specific tool to do a very, very specific kind of storytelling that they were interested in and that they found didn't exist, that this platform didn't exist out there, so they designed it themselves, right? So if you could talk a little bit about this tension between choices on, and I know it's always about money, but like, let's move beyond that. About what do you do what do you give up by using these generalizable platforms? What aren't you doing in Voyager that you feel like you should be doing if you were designing your own platform? Just those kind of tensions between those choices that all of us in this room are making.
Right. Well, we did like Voyager because it was sort of built, by a cultural heritage institution for presenting cultural heritage. So there are things out there already in use by, in our medical campus or, earth and environmental science or all these other sort of people who are using VR or scanning things, but they never felt quite right for cultural heritage. And so that's what we really, it had that cultural heritage focus, Voyager. We all know in this room how technology changes and technology partners change their minds, Sketchfab. And so how, to prevent those problems from happening, we're always looking at open source tools that we can access easily but are also not so complicated that this was something we could stand up. We didn't even need to go to our library technical services, so it was that level of easy. So that part was important to us. So the technology work. What are we losing? Sketchfab does make it really easy to find models and download models. When we have it in Voyager, we're kind of relying on our SEO for people to find it, or know it exists and is housed by us to find it in a way that someone can just go to Sketchfab and use the search box and find stuff. So that's definitely a loss in terms of findability for the work. That's probably the single biggest loss, actually. But that's also why we plan to have 2 access points. So we'll have the Voyager viewer, but then we're also going to put the materials in our data repository. So, we've been testing with it already. So we'll have the underlying files, but then it will also have a viewer. So the viewer works in our data repository as well. So that ends up sort of at least 2 different access points and improving some of the SEO. But yeah, that's probably the single biggest loss, actually.
The good thing about Voyager 2 that is nice is that it is open source. So if we did want to create changes to create a platform that's more tailored to what we want and what WashU wants, it is very easy to go in, grab that code, and change it up and create a viewer that is what we want. But I also agree with Sarah, the single most biggest challenge, I guess, is the searchability and findability of these maquettes. If you don't know what you're looking for in Google, you're not going to find them. And so it is really specific to individuals who are interested in Ezell and know what to look up, because if you search Ezell maquette, we pop up right away. However, if you're not really curious and know what to look up, a lot of people probably don't even know what the word maquette means. That's the challenge there.
Right.
So Curtis, just looking toward the time, do we have time for one last question, or do we need to go to the second and we'll hold the...
Let's do one last question.
Okay, Sean, you had a question?
I did, yeah. John Ezell is still alive. This was a surprise to me as a historian, because usually my subjects are safely dead. Has he been at all involved in the project? Has he seen the 3D models? Is he a potential source of oral history in addition to providing notes and other materials from the studio?
Maybe.
This is the problem with people.
Yeah. Our special collections curator is nurturing the relationship to make sure we get all the goodies. But whether he's prepared to do something like oral history is another story. So we'll see.
He was involved
He certainly was involved in the beginning.
in the beginning of the project, but slowly kind of lost interest, I think. So trying to continue that relationship is something that I would really like to do. And also adding the oral history aspect and notes and stuff, as you were saying, is something that I'm actually very interested in. However, kind of nurturing that connection, and also with the amount of staffing we have for this project, which is very low, and we have other priorities within libraries, it is a little bit more challenging.
The same old issues.
Yeah. But it is something that I would love to do before he leaves us.
So per our organizers, I think we need to unfortunately move on. It's really been wonderful to start us off this morning. Thank you, Harper and Sarah. Appreciate that very much. So.